Synchro-Mystique presents. In May of 2021, when the World Health Organization, or WHO, announced novel naming conventions for the equally novel coronavirus, we were launched headlong into onomastics, a field of study that falls under the heading of lexicology, and that Fortean blogger Lauren Coleman has dubbed the name game. In the WHO's new vocabulary, mutated versions of the original pathogen, called variants, will, in the foreseeable future, be designated by letters of the Greek alphabet. Until the end of October 2021, the most prominent of these variants was Delta, about which letter we will have more to say in a moment. But in November, the world was introduced to Omicron, which word itself means little o. As Twilight language expert Michael Hoffman has publicized, and as a visit to the appropriate entry on Wiktionary.com will confirm, Omicron has a pair of provocative anagrams. Although it is possible to imagine percipients rearranging these themselves, whether consciously or subconsciously, I'm a bit dubious about the reliability or impact of this. However, it is beyond doubt that various media outlets have drawn deliberate attention to some of these recombinations, and this exercise sets these anagrammatic possibilities before our minds. There's a widely publicized anagram spelling the word moronic, and this fits into a broad fool-related symbol pattern that I will touch on briefly here, but will further develop in a subsequent video. Also of interest is the fact that the word Omicron can be broken down into the names Omi and Kron, which, as this Hoffman wire points out, summon the specters of two heathen gods, Odin, recently featured as a character in various installments of the so-called Marvel Cinematic Universe, and Cronus. In Greek mythology, Cronus was the pre-Olympian god who castrated and deposed his father Uranus, only to be dethroned himself by his son Zeus, also known as Jupiter. If you think that this association is far-fetched, I direct your attention to this New York Post headline that unmistakably links the word Omicron with ideas of deity. One finds a Saturnian undercurrent to recent events. Saturn, of course, is the Roman version of Cronus. Before we venture too far down this road, we must address an apparent difficulty. Numerous online sources are at pains to disassociate or otherwise distinguish Cronus-Saturn from Kronos, otherwise known as the god of time. It is frequently claimed that it is erroneous to identify Cronus and Kronos. However, whether an errant confusion or a justified equation, the fact is there is ample reason to consider the Greco-Roman Titan to be part of the same symbol set as the figure sometimes designated Father Time. Saturn's Greek name, Kronos, and the Greek word for time, Kronos, are nearly identical. The 1st to 2nd century historian and philosopher Plutarch asserted, quote, Kronos is a figurative name for time. The anonymous ancient authority known only as Pseudo-Clementine, writing sometime around the 3rd century AD, give or take 100 years, declared, quote, Kronos, who is Saturn, is allegorically time. To quote the New York Times again, the myth of Saturn became an allegory of time. He devours his children because time also destroys whatever it creates. Even Wikipedia can be summoned to the effect that interpreting Cronus as a personification of time was commonplace in antiquity. Furthermore, the mammoth Dictionary of Ancient Deities, published by the prestigious Oxford University Press, links Kronos and Saturn as aliases for Cronus, regarding these, with all their variant spellings, as synonyms for that deity who is both God of the world and God of time. Incidentally, the phrase God of the world appears reflected in the Bible, with 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 4 informing us that, quote, the God of this world blinds unbelievers. An allied concept is picked up by the curious late 19th, early 20th century French thinker René Guénon, whose book The King, or The Lord of the World, is an extended investigation of and meditation upon the legendary realm of Agartha. Suffice it to say that, for purposes of this present symbol odyssey anyway, we will echo the succinct statement of the online mythology encyclopedia Theoi.com. Quote, Kronos was essentially the same as Kronos, the primordial god of time. The association is not trivial. For one thing, some mystery religions, such as Mithraism, placed Kronos as the pinnacle of their often vast and multifarious pantheons. But also, the connection ramifies the Saturnian leitmotif, which, to borrow a phrase from the Gospel according to Luke, chapter 21, verse 25, includes signs in the heavens. Who remembers the so-called Great Conjunction at the end of 2020? This rare astronomical event involved the perceived alignment of Jupiter and Saturn, and despite Saturn's often dark interpretive profile, was referred to as the Christmas star by some media outlets. To emphasize the singular nature of this celestial state of affairs, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or NASA, underscored the fact that such a close approach of these two largest planets in our solar system hadn't occurred since the publication of William Shakespeare's first folio in 1623, and hadn't been visible since the Catholic crusade against the Albigensians was carried out in 1226. With one crucial exception, press descriptions of the 2020 Christmas star were reminiscent of a presentation titled The Star of Bethlehem and put on by one Rick Larson, which made the rounds in churches around 2007. The conspicuous difference was that in Larson's hypothesis, the original Star of Bethlehem, said to have heralded the birth of Jesus Christ, involved a conjunction of Jupiter with Venus, as opposed to Jupiter with Saturn. And this substitution changes the meaning, astrologically speaking. Is this Saturnine Christmas star announcing the birth of something? Hold that thought. 4. In the discipline known as mundane astrology, Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions are regarded as presaging widespread changes in society as a whole. And wouldn't you know it, supposedly, astrology is experiencing a surge in popularity unprecedented since the 1970s. According to the British Broadcasting Corporation, this boosted prestige is explicable in virtue of a search for guidance and meaning in the midst of a seemingly never-ending pandemic and in the wake of explosive bursts of populism, for example, as seen in Brexit and the presidency of Donald Trump. Whatever the merits or demerits of this ancient subject, the full story behind increasing demand for drawing up of horoscopes and related services cannot be told without mention of some of the sociological stage managers operating largely unseen behind the scenes. We read that supposedly the year 2020 was a topic of anxious speculation in the astrology community long before COVID-19 became a household word. The sympathetic article explains that astrologers interpreted rare conjunctions of Saturn and Pluto and the aforementioned conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter as harbingers of trauma and transformation. Is this paragraph to be found on Oprah Winfrey's website? Or is it embedded in a sales pitch for some astrology app like CoStar or Sanctuary? As a matter of fact, it's an excerpt from an analysis by Dr. Omi Alicia, professor of anthropology at the City University of New York. Alicia's think piece was posted by the nonprofit Social Science Research Council, or SSRC, and is presumably written for academic specialists and industry insiders. But in what area or field? Just who and what is the SSRC? Founded in 1923, the SSRC was apparently funded by a veritable A-list of ostensibly philanthropic organizations such as the Carnegie Corporation, as well as the Ford, Laura Spelman Rockefeller, and Russell Sage Foundations. Its records are housed in the Rockefeller Archive Center in Westchester County, just northeast of New York City. Dr. Alondra Nelson, who concluded her stint as SSRC president in 2021, is billed as, quote, an acclaimed sociologist who has past associations with Princeton University's esteemed Institute for Advanced Study in New Jersey. And I would be remiss if I forgot to mention that she currently serves as Deputy Science Chief to President Joe Biden. So it seems safe to say that the SSRC does not lack establishment connections. But what does it do? To begin to sketch an answer to that question, let's look briefly at two important figures from the SSRC's past, Charles Miriam and Harold Lasswell. Miriam was known for combining behavioral psychology with political science. He sought to create, quote, a manipulative science that could alter social structure. In case viewers are unaware, the use of psychological manipulations aimed at influencing opinions and actions is one of the basic definitions of propaganda given by the important 20th century French theorist Jacques Ellul. So the SSRC was essentially founded by professional propagandists. According to the late political philosopher Sir Bernard Crick, Miriam and his cohorts, such as Lasswell, particularly focused on the creation of propaganda that was characterized by, quote, the manipulative use of symbols, slogans, and keywords. Lasswell himself explicitly stated that such a symbolical manipulation of the public was the means by which elites may be attacked or defended. Lasswell believed that the elite preserves its ascendancy, in part, by manipulating symbols. Far from being a dead letter, something of this same sentiment was recently articulated by The Matrix Resurrections director Lana Wachowski, when she stated that technology has the power to trap or limit our subjective reality. That money elites have a deep, abiding academic and economic interest in propaganda and symbolism should be kept firmly in mind when we discover, for instance, that the current wave of COVID has the same name as an obscure 1963 Italian sci-fi flick about a body-invading alien bent on world domination. This is especially so since it is an open secret that government information brokers and psychological warfare operators, not least of which include the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency, have for years had an entree into the so-called show business. Likewise, discovering Omicron references in video games should scarcely surprise us, for similar reasons. Namely, there has arguably been a CIA video game company pipeline since at least the mid-1990s. Of course, the cover story is that such a connection is merely the entertainment industry equivalent of former athletes being enlisted as broadcasters for their color commentary. Those who have a bit more familiarity with the history of psych war may be forgiven if they are unable to suppress a chuckle. But unusual and symbolical references are hardly limited to amusements and diversions. Would you believe that some cases of COVID secondary infection have a physiological presentation dubbed Rings of Saturn? Let us turn for a moment anyway from these odds and ends to a more significant image, the visage of the man nominated, quote, the public face of the Capitol riot. His semi-nude appearance and horned head reminds this observer of the wild and woolly fertility spirits and companions of the god Pan that are known as satyrs. Apparently, you don't need too much assistance locating these fantastic beasts, as they are part of a cluster of mythic figures who are, quote, not difficult to catch, as this particular specimen discovered shortly after his odd photo session on Capitol Hill. Among the myriad features of this quasi-satyr, especially in light of the Greek-flavored alphabet soup served up by the doctors at WHO, is the tattoo emblazoned over his left pectoral muscle. Per a hyperbole-laced article on theconversation.com, the symbol in question, a valnut, is Nordic in origin and therefore linked to the previously mentioned Odin. It consists of a trio of mutually interlocking deltas, which word, of course, is the name of another prominent member of the COVID variety pack. The triangle-shaped delta occurs in the symbology of Freemasonry, where it is frequently represented with an eye in its center. Weirdly, as thevigilancecitizen.com has noted, the Greek letter Omicron developed out of earlier alphabetic characters, such as the Semitic akin, that were originally modeled after the human eye. What a coinkydink. Some sources claim that the Omicron variant may have unusual symptoms that may even include, quote, sore eyes. Additionally, the triangle delta, a supreme Masonic symbol of deity, according to widely cited authority Albert Mackey, is usually drawn emanating various rays that are known as a glory. As discussed in our previous video, another name for a glory is a corona. Corona has been in the news recently as when the NASA Parker Solar Space Probe touched the sun by passing through the sun's corona. And there are numerous corona references in popular movies. For example, Captain America: The First Avenger, after Steve Rogers emerges from some sort of cryo-sleep, he's flanked in this scene by a Corona beer and a weird spiky ball looking thing that resembles pictures of the coronavirus. or in the movie Falling Down, when the main character, played by Michael Douglas, finally snaps. He does so at the symbolical intersection of Corona Street with Corona Street. And according to the pervasive SSRC, we have in the coronavirus a new sovereign, a virus with a crown. The primary meaning, of course, for corona is crown. A secondary meaning is garland or wreath, and it can even refer to a circle. In one of the SSRC's policy papers, we read, "Moments of crisis often recast the roles of governments and the rights of individuals." This corona sovereign appears to be a tyrant, as with COVID-19, quote, "global attacks on freedom of expression are having a dangerous impact." Before we move off the Delta, however, we shouldn't forget that at least some of those involved in the events of January the 6th, 2020, which will be examined in much greater detail in Part 2, would have marched from the Trump rally to the Capitol along the hypotenuse of what is called in Washington, D.C., Federal Triangle. In Masonic lore, the hypotenuse of the Pythagorean triangle stands for the issue of a sacred marriage, or hieros gamos, between the divine masculine and the divine feminine. Believe it or not, the symbolism of the Pythagorean triangle isn't the only sexualized element of this whole sordid affair. First of all, we should note that, according to the Ashgate Encyclopedia of Literary and Cinematic Monsters, not only are the words Saturn and Satyr cognates, but they both derive from the Greek word for the male reproductive organ. Ancient natural historian Pliny the Elder concurs on the point, saying that the word satyr is the namesake of the membrum virile on account of their proclivity toward lust. This is likely one reason why satyrs are sometimes depicted ithophalically. This would all perhaps be an irrelevance presently, were it not for a bizarre fact. It seems the Federal Bureau of Investigation entered into evidence in an official court filing a photoshopped image featuring the QAnon shaman adjacent to a lewd picture of a man. Officially, there was no suggestion that the FBI had created the so-called meme, merely that some unwitting agent had included it by accident. As noted in passing already, satyrs are also associated with the fawn-like god Pan. This lusty figure lends his name to the terror-stricken frame of mind termed panic, an all too familiar word in our era of around-the-clock COVID media coverage. Oh, and recall when we asked about whether the great Saturn-Jupiter conjunction should be read as a birth announcement. Consider that Arthur Machen, the 19th to 20th century Welsh horror novelist, wrote a book called The Great God Pan. The plot? Well, let's just say that it appears to have been one of the principal forerunners, not to say inspirations, for Ira Levin's 1967 book, Rosemary's Baby, which was made into a movie the following year by Polish-born filmmaker Roman Polanski. And it's not for nothing that the proprietors of Tarot.com bid readers to take note of, quote, the similarity between the words Saturn and Satan. This connection is also drawn by Aleister Crowley's protege, Kenneth Grant, who links Saturn and his emasculating sickle with Satan, Shaitan, and Set. Yet a further peculiarity stems from the QAnon shaman's real name. He is sometimes called Jake Angeli, and at other times his surname is given as Chansley. The online etymology dictionary starts us off by registering the idea that Jake is the typical name of a rustic lout or a country bumpkin. But the really juicy tidbit lies in the more usual observation that Jacob means supplanter. Or to be technical, the meaning is sometimes given by the phrase, he takes by the heel, or he cheats. In the book of Genesis, chapter 27, verse 36, we read that Esau, son of Isaac and grandson of Abraham, lamenting the theft by his own brother of his birthright, exclaims, quote, "Is he not rightly named Jacob? For he has cheated me." What intrigues me here can be gleaned from the offbeat 17th century treatise Daemonologia Sacra, written by the marginal English minister Richard Gilpin. Gilpin makes the incisive remark that, quote, "We may say of Satan what Esau said of Jacob, that they're both supplanters." Indeed, Cronus Saturn was a supplanter too. After all, he overthrew his father Uranus, until he himself was overthrown by Zeus Jupiter. So right at center stage, we're presented with a burly character whose name translates to supplanting angel. But if Angeli is playing a Saturnian role, then where is his sickle? Arguably, there's no more prominent face lately than that of Anthony Fauci. He's dominating the news cycle. The reason for his celebrity owes to his dual position as director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases and chief medical advisor to the president. According to the Oxford University's Dictionary of American Family Names, the surname Fauci means, well, have you guessed it? Fauci means sickle. There's a numerological aspect to all this as well, and as usual, it's multifaceted. For starters, as with Hebrew, Latin, and some other languages, Greek characters lead a double life as both letters and numerals. Viewers will observe that, considered as a cardinal or counting number, Omicron is assigned a value of 70. It may be of passing interest, therefore, that news reports of late have been seasoned with references to 70s. For example, until a retraction was issued recently, we were told that Omicron variant accounted for around 70% of COVID cases, at least in California. Omicron supposedly multiplies 70 times faster than Delta. At the same time, it's around 70% less severe. Omicron, or a variant cousin, seems to have afflicted 70 medics at one Christmas party, and one community is summoning an equivalent number of National Guard persons to address the associated surge. Or again, guess how many cruise liners have been allegedly hit by COVID? Or here's one, what percentage of immunization coverage is the World Health Organization aiming at by mid-2022? If you need a hint, it's the same number that keeps showing up in reports about January the 6th, 2020, concerning arrests, guilty pleas, and sentencing. Even the total, if preposterously large, number of riot defendants is a multiple of 70. And coincidentally, it's also the number of military-connected participants to the so-called Capitol insurrection. 70 is also the number of officers who have resigned or otherwise, quote, left the Capitol Police since the January 6th riot. Stay tuned for the second part of this study, where I will be preoccupied with the symbolism specifically surrounding January the 6th. 70 isn't the only numerical value of interest. For Saturn, by way of its 3x3 magic square, has a magnetic relationship with the number 15. You will see that every column, diagonal, and row in the diagram sums to 15. So I was unsurprised to read that 15% of arrestees have been denied bail. I wasn't shocked at all to learn that Omicron, at the time of this writing, was found in 15 U.S. states. And seeing that Jake Angeli was sentenced to a total of 51 months in prison, you will note that 51 is merely 15 with the digits transposed. To be strictly accurate, Angeli Chansley's ultimate sentence was 41 months, though it is unclear to me whether he was given a reduced prison sentence or whether he was simply given credit for the 10+ months of time he had already served. Be that as it may, one of the major components of occult theory and practice is the tarot, so it is always worth a look to see if there is some relevant correspondence, particularly in the so-called trump cards. And in this case, card 15, labeled the Devil, in both Rider-Waite and Crowley decks, caught my attention. According to Aleister Crowley, the 19th century magus Eliphas Levi, quote, identified the Devil card with Baphomet, the ass-headed idol of the Knights of the Temple, also known as the Knights Templar. Crowley goes on to remark that, quote, the card also refers to Capricornus in the zodiac. This association is made fairly obvious in Crowley's version of the card. He adds that, quote, the sign is ruled by Saturn, and the card represents Pangenitor, the all-begetter. It should be noted that Crowley explicitly equates Saturn with the Egyptian god Set, as well as with the Islamic Shaitan and with Satan. Crowley then concludes his fascinating analysis of the 15th tarot trump by drawing one final reference to Pan and connecting the devil symbol, quote, to the letter ayin, which means an eye. And with that, we come full circle, so to speak, back to the Omicron, which letter you will recall also derived from ayin. We arrive also at what is perhaps the most crucial numerological correspondence. As Edward Berger writes in The Power of Zero, quote, in the 2nd century CE, Ptolemy used the Greek letter Omicron, which looks like an O, to denote nothing. So this is the symbol for zero. The O that we see, the circle. In other words, one hypothesis, though contested, has it that Omicron was used since the Greek word for nothing started with that letter. Speaking of nothing, I seem to recollect seeing that word somewhere. Oh yes, I remember. Nothing is what we'll soon own, according to the World Economic Forum. But we'll be happy. This is part and parcel of the Great Reset, of course. Announced in June of 2020, the Great Reset was the theme of what the World Economic Forum press release termed a, quote, unique twin summit, which also happened to be the 51st meeting of Davos men and women. The face and founder of the World Economic Forum is the dour-looking German-born engineer Klaus Schwab. But the Great Reset initiative was jointly announced by Schwab in conjunction with Britain's Prince Charles, the Secretary General of the United Nations, and the head of the International Monetary Fund. And it is being undertaken with financial titans from Asia, Europe, and North America, including British Petroleum, MasterCard, and Microsoft. Subsequently, the phraseology was echoed by other heavy hitters, such as venture capitalist Peter Thiel, author of the book 0 to 1. It's intriguing to note that one of the primary definitions for the word reset is to set back to a zero state. It seems that zero is a buzzword and choice title for numerous projects and schemes of late. Does its relation to the Great Reset have to do with its mathematical reputation as the great equalizer? Any other number, when multiplied by zero, produces zero as a result, and any other number raised to the power of zero becomes 1. On the other hand, adding or subtracting zero has no effect. In a way, zero's equalizing properties are inescapable. By the way, a U.S. Army doctor thinks that, in a similar way, quote, there's no way to escape the Omicron variant. The whole world will be vaccinated or infected. Or perhaps both. But we may not need armchair speculation about the significance of the Great Reset, for 2021 had been declared a new year zero by the same Klaus Schwab whose expressionless visage we just saw. Schwab is self-consciously drawing a line to the year zero or 0 hour that began in 1945 with the denazification of Germany. According to the relevant Wikipedia article, 0 hour is a synonym for radical new beginnings and the eradication of old traditions. And the World Economic Forum program isn't the only one that is preoccupied with zero-related symbolism. Environmentalism and climate change doomsayers are as well, as exemplified in this video production from 2019. In fact, the phrase net zero has become the stated goal of those who wish to eliminate carbon emissions. Among net zero enthusiasts is former Microsoft chieftain Bill Gates, who revealed in September of 2021 that he was launching his own news publication named Cipher, which derives from an old Arabic word for zero. Symbolically, Sifra basically designates a council, satrap, or viceroy whose authority is delegated to him by the true sovereign. Cognates abound and seem to be popular choices for villain names, as evidenced by Le Chiffre in the 2006 remake of the James Bond movie Casino Royale, or the traitorous original Matrix character Cypher, who expressed regret over having taken the red truth pill and eventually favorably quotes the aphorism, "Ignorance is bliss." The English word cipher sometimes also refers to something expressed secretly or in code. This usage reflects the fact that the concept of zero emanates uncertainty. Yet another commonality with Omicron, a variant against which vaccines provide, quote, absolutely zilch, that is, zero, in terms of protection. At least according to this immunologist's lament. As the late historian of the occult James Webb pointed out, large outbreaks of unreason often follow fast on the heels of societal catastrophes, such as the crisis of 0 AD. According to notorious global consulting firm McKinsey, which helped construct the now ubiquitous zebra-striped Universal Product Code, Omicron is ushering in a new, quote, uncertain chapter in the pandemic narrative. Is this because of Omicron's uncertain origin? In Cartesian geometrical terms, of course, the origin is always 0, 0, and division by 0 results in a quotient that is variously labeled as infinity or undefined. All this is being presented as an ominous portent for the world and the global economy. And this is despite the fact that for many weeks it was said that Omicron was responsible for 0 deaths, a claim that even the system-approved fact-checkers at Snopes.com acknowledged was true. Yet the Federal Reserve Bank, known as the Fed, has kept interest rates hovering around 0. You may recall that the initial rationale for the 0% involved the Fed's claim that such rock-bottom rates were required to avert market panic. The word panic, of course, takes us back to the Greek god Pan, whose name, Pan, signifies all, quite the opposite of 0. Appropriately enough, Pan's origins are uncertain. What about Mr. Jake Angeli? Prior to January 6th, he had 0 criminal history. Similarly, the 15-year-old Oxford high school shooter Ethan Crumbley had no prior disciplinary infractions before taking the lives of several of his classmates, one of whom was repeatedly pictured with a large yellow-orange 0 on his jacket. It is of course vital to appreciate that in English, the numeral 0 and the letter O are often used interchangeably. So much so that a popular 1990s television show, ostensibly the zip code for Beverly Hills, California, 90210, was pronounced 90210. Or again, consider the 2012 movie Zero Dark 30, which presented Hollywood's version of the search for Osama bin Laden. In military jargon, the titular phrase would most often be heard as, "Oh, Dark 30. So when you see the photograph of the unfortunate Tate Meyer, remember that it makes virtually 0 difference whether the prominent patch on his varsity jacket is a numeral or the initial letter of Oxford. The visual and psychic impact is arguably the same. Relatedly, the roundabout outside Oxford High School's entrance discharges the same 0-point energy, if I may take a little artistic license. We were introduced to circular signs during the most recent presidential election cycle, as Joe Biden's campaign logo featured 4 of them. His design may itself have been a takeoff from the emblem previously used by Barack Obama. Turning away from circles for a moment, let us recollect the campaign speech in which Hillary Clinton, quote, put half of Trump's supporters into the basket of deplorables. In light of the present study, this is interesting, not least because deplorables, in this context, refers to people who are regarded as uneducated, worthless nobodies. Deplorables are people with no importance or authority at all, not even as ciphers. As pointed out in the Handbook on Autoethnography, our familiar 0-O shape would be a fitting shorthand for such people, partly as a throwback to Odysseus's ploy to outwit the Cyclops in Homer's epic, The Odyssey. In any case, deplorables are contemptuous, undistinguished zeros. In the 2018 film Vice, Christian Bale portrays George W. Bush's former VP in a stylized take on how Dick Cheney became, in the director's estimation, one of the most powerful autocrats in U.S. history, from a big fat, piss-soaked 0, as actress Amy Adams memorably stated it. The Penguin Dictionary of Symbols builds upon the observation that zeros have no properties of their own by connecting this powerful numeral to the initiatory significance of the Fool in the tarot pack. Also called the Simpleton, quote, the Fool has no number. Well, no positive number anyway. Viewers may wish to ponder for a moment the fact, stated earlier, that one of Omicron's anagrams is a synonym for the word fool. Self-proclaimed libertarian pundit Kristen Tate drew a direct parallel between fools and Clinton's deplorables in her 2020 book, The Liberal Invasion of Red State America. The cover art is provocative and suggests a possible link with the Purple Revolution concept attributed to Bank of England breaker George Soros. The World Economic Forum itself associates the Great Reset, or the Great Zeroing, with what it labels the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And this probably won't shock attentive observers, since the pervasive Saturnian symbolism has had revolutionary connotations since antiquity. The Fool Tarot card is variously designated 0 and 22, which variance amounts to 6 of one and half dozen of the other, since either way, the Fool is said to represent, quote, a return to 0, like resetting a meter. Indeed, used as a verb, 0 and reset are frequently intersubstitutable, at least in the field of electronics. Who else stands for both beginning and end? Why, Saturn, of course. According to author Dennis Hauck, Saturn was the most important planet to the alchemists. They equated it with the first matter and considered it to be both the beginning and the end of the great work. Let's take stock. Explicit time references have been prominent parts of many recent news items. Think back once more to Jacob Angeli Chansley, the man the media coronated the QAnon shaman. Rolling Stone reports that Mr. Angeli is alleged to have written a note to Mike Pence, warning the then vice president, quote, "It's only a matter of time. Justice is coming." For a slightly more sober-minded source, take a look at this tantalizing headline from Scientific American titled, "Now is the time to re-establish reality." It includes a juicy quotation from our old friend Alondra Nelson of Social Science Research Council fame. Nelson advises Biden and his team that in order to sell the American public on, quote, "a sense of shared reality," it is necessary to, in her phrase, reset the clock. The full implications of this are a little, well, uncertain, but Dr. Nelson suggests that it would need to involve the use of executive orders, likely building upon the draconian edifice expanded by Dick Cheney. In line with the SSRC's raison d'etre, this chronological zeroing will involve behind-the-scenes behavioral science and a liberal dose of denigration for, quote, "conspiratorial delusions and paranoid thinking," end quote. Science and technology now sit in the center, or, to be more precise, technocrats sit in the center, wearing lab coats for photo ops brought to us by their corporate sponsors. As a final note, let's consider Marxist-inspired critical theorist Walter Benjamin. In his 1940 essay, Theses on the Philosophy of History, otherwise known as On the Concept of History, Benjamin developed his notion of Jetzeit, or, quote, "a time that is ripe for revolution." In Benjamin's estimation, revolutionary upheaval is precipitated by a moment he calls Stillstellung, sometimes translated standstill. But the editors at Marxists.org preferred the phrase zero hour, and Benjamin's zero hour sparks a chain of events of supposedly messianic proportions and enables the stage managers to exploit a revolutionary chance to reorganize the world. But alas, I see we're out of time. See Part 2 for an in-depth look at the so-called 2020 Capitol insurrection, including tie-ins to Victor Hugo's 1831 novel, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, the opening scene of which takes place during the joint celebration of Epiphany and the Feast of Fools, January the 6th, 1482.